Oh,
And
okay.
so I'll figure that out.
I'm not freaking out. So, yeah.
Well, we got just a couple more minutes. It looks like we're streaming, so I don't know if they can hear us or not. Just watch what you say. We're little secrets.
And so then I said, I know it's top secret.
Right.
What am I supposed to do about that?
So is your trip to the grocery store your big social event of the week?
It's my family chore. I get in line at 7:30. I go in, I hit it fast. I'm out by 8:35, the end. So trying to limit exposure like a good citizen. So
yeah. I haven't left the house in a while. I need to get back.
My guilty pleasure, and I mean my big Schadenfreude pleasure actually, is that I'm paddling a couple of 3 times a week on the lake, which is, super low. It's very easy to keep your social distance. Like I can usually keep at least 60 meters out there. And the lake has just been dreamy fantastic because there's nobody on it. They closed down all the concessions. So it's just me and my board and some guy on the horizon. And that's pretty much it.
I'm going to the Commons Ford, the park in my neighborhood.
Oh yeah. I like Commons Ford a lot.
Yeah. Well, it looks like it's we're getting straight up on 2 o'clock, and Katie, I think, has us broadcasting to the world. So let's go ahead and get started. Beeman Floyd, thanks for being with us again. We had a conversation like this a couple of weeks ago now with our faculty fellows. For those of you who are tuning in, you can watch that recording of it on the TCCTA YouTube channel. We're going to go over the same material, so this will be updated. We'll be talking about many of the things, but with more current information now. I have to say, I was looking over my notes from our last conversation, and 2 weeks ago, I thought, man, those were the days that things have actually gotten in some ways more difficult now. So, but that link is there if anyone's interested for that. Also, before we get started, I want to let our members know about a new program that we've recently launched. Actually 2. This is the first of 3 webinars we'll be hosting in the next several days on current issues around the world we live in right now with quarantining, shelter in place, and just responding to the crisis that we're in. Beeman and I will be talking about the policy implications of all this and what is happening at the state level. We'll also be talking with people about teaching online and best practices in that area. I know that people have been inundated with best practices and tips and things like that, but we've got some people who have really done some thoughtful work on this. So I hope you'll tune in for that. Be looking for that on the TCCTA website. And also we have a program with Louella Tate, who's at Austin Community College. She spoke at our convention this last year about the role of empathy with our students and understanding their world, what they're going through, and connecting with them on a personal level. That has only become more urgent now that we're teaching at a distance and needing to make more of a point of creating those connections with our students so that they see that they're a part of this work and that it's not just something happening at a superficial level, but that you really are asking them to engage deeply as students in the work that you're requiring of them. And so Louella's session will be our 3rd web conference that we're doing statewide. So be looking for that also on the TCCTA website and on the YouTube channel. We're also doing a program, we're calling them TCCTA Meetups. These are based on the Great Teaching Roundup that we do every May. It's a master teacher seminar, small group conversations with teachers, just talking with each other, sharing ideas, struggles, successes, things that are helping them do the work and really connect with their calling to teach. It really goes beyond the kinds of things you talk about at a normal conference and really gets into the lived reality and the importance of what it means to be a teacher and how you can see yourself as part of a community, that we're going through this together with a bunch of people who understand you and what you're going through. Be looking for emails from Katie Agnew in our office on that, or you can visit the TCCTA website and we have information about those meetups. They're groups of 10 or fewer teachers, and you'll meet weekly from now through the summer and really bond with each other, get to know each other, support each other as we go forward. So please be looking for that. The response so far has been really strong, and we expect that to grow. So be looking for that information, and I hope you'll participate in that and help support your colleagues and get support from them as we move forward. So now let's go ahead and get into this conversation. Beeman, a lot has been happening at the national level when it comes to COVID-19 and the global response, the national response, but there is also significant movement at the state level in response to this. How is Texas responding? Just at the general level, what is happening? Last we spoke, the governor had made an announcement. He's made another one since then. What are you hearing?
Well, I think first of all, the general, and that is that Texas is on the forefront of this national tension between the economic damage being done by COVID and the health risk posed by COVID. If you look at the actual epidemiological metrics of Texas, we've actually done quite well. We've done very well in terms of limiting the spread of the disease, taking the social distancing measures seriously generally as the state. We've all seen with our own eyes and in the media the exceptions to that of various groups who have said, if I can't see it, it can't hurt me or whatever. But in general, if you just look at again the epidemiology of the disease, Texas has done very well. We've been far below that sort of 10% increase per day line of demarcation that has distinguished hotspots from places that are controlling the curve. That being said, our state elected officials have, throughout the course of COVID, expressed concerns about the economy. We know that the economic life in Texas has been very good comparatively for the last several years, and that has distinguished hotspots from. And we have, but our state officials are sort of champing at the bit. Last Friday, the governor came forward in a pretty big and well-publicized press statement and press conference where he started the preliminary act of reopening Texas. The way he did it was kind of interesting. It was quite measured. The first thing that is super important to us is he definitively stated that both higher education and public education would remain closed through the end of the semester. So he sort of settled that hash for us and for our members, which I think, just editorially, I think of as a good thing. And the feedback that I've gotten so far from both higher ed and public ed interests is that that's really a good thing to have that settled. Mm-hmm. He did talk about a scaled reopening of businesses, and he talked about an additional announcement on April 27th that would be a more comprehensive announcement. So our current situation in Texas is schools, both public ed, higher ed, private school, all of the above will be closed for the remainder of the semester. That guidance will be offered by both the Higher Ed Coordinating Board and the Commissioner of Education on how to proceed into the summer. That guidance has not appeared yet in a very specific way. that there will be a scaled reopening of businesses, starting in his Friday announcement with businesses that feel like they can operate mail order or curbside, essentially non-retail space commerce. That is, you can call in an order or go online and make an order and have that delivered to your car window, much like takeout restaurants have been operating throughout the crisis.
HEB's been doing that, yeah.
Right. Yeah, there was a limited reopening of the state parks. We can go to state parks, but you have to basically make an online reservation because they're limiting the number of people in those spaces, and they want to be able to monitor that. There are a bunch of question marks. The big national question mark, which also applies to Texas, and that is, are we going to have a testing regime that gives us real-time feedback on whether or not these openings are causing an increase in transmission of the disease? We don't know the answer to that. Are we going to have a broader reopening in the very near future of direct contact services? We don't know that. Are his orders into the future going to preempt local government ordinances related to the spread and transmission of the disease in a broad sense? And so, in other words, will we have a one opening concept for all of Texas? We don't know that. There are what the governor has signaled so far is something directional, which is we feel like we've flattened out the top of this disease enough for us to start thinking about an incremental reopening, and that's what he's going to do. But there are just a number of question marks in that statement.
Well, and that response generally, I mean, each specific decision is critical, but the general strategy seems to track what I'm hearing from epidemiologists, that it needs to be a phased-in reopening. We don't just say tomorrow Texas is opening; that it's something that we do in incrementally. But it does create a lot of unknowns and uncertainty because they're letting us know as we go, because they probably don't know more than a few days or a couple of weeks out what the next step needs to be.
Yeah, the other interesting observation is that we were in the lead in reopening the state for about 5 minutes. That our governor made his pronouncement, and almost immediately the Georgia governor came out behind him and said, we're reopening personal service businesses like hairdressers and tattoo parlors and massage therapists and things like that. So it really was even though we were first to announce it, we were really following a middle path and are following a middle path, it seems like. And there are other states who are going to blaze the trail more quickly, and I would say editorially more recklessly than we are. And sadly, we're going to get data out of those spaces too, probably. So.
Now, one of the challenges in this is the not knowing as we go along. Where are the places you look for information when you want to see what's happening at the state level? Where do you go, and where would you suggest our members check today?
Very much. I mean, because of the peculiarity of Texas, this is all about the executive branch of government right now. We are not. We do not have a legislature in session. Unless something really radical changes, it is very doubtful that we will have a legislature in session. The governor has not drifted an idea of a special session. Some others have, but the governor has not, and most of the leadership spaces in Texas have not called hard for a special. So the executive branch of government is calling the shots. You start right with the governor's, the office of the governor of Texas. He's got a website with the COVID button on it, and you can pull up his proclamations. And I strongly encourage citizens of Texas not just to rely on the reporting of those things, but to actually read the proclamations. The whereases make a difference in those proclamations. They typically start with about a dozen or so whereas statements that basically are the facts that underpin what is coming. And then you have the big transition in the proclamation, therefore, and then you get to know what's going on. But understanding the actual language of the proclamations and reading them in whole, I think is helpful for any citizen. Certainly helpful for people who are doing what we and your members are doing, which is trying to understand the broader policy implications of this.
And I would say it's not hard to do. You're not reading a 300-page bill.
They're 2-3 pages, yeah. But they're important, and there are lists of them in sequence on the governor's office website. So I'd start with the governor's office website and then go to the Higher Ed Coordinating Board website. The Higher Ed Coordinating Board has I would call it a robust website on COVID. The actual response from the coordinating board to the crisis is still a work in progress. So I wouldn't get all excited about seeing a whole bunch of like meaty content about what's next and what you're going to be called upon or asked to do next. But what you do have is sort of a comprehensive picture of what's going on in terms of their thinking, what they're thinking toward on the higher ed website. And then
members can find the link to that to the right of the screen there. We have that up for you. And
then I would not ignore your city and county websites because again, right now it is unclear where there have been some of the gubernatorial proclamations have had specific preemptions of local ordinance, but a lot of them haven't. And so what you're living under right now, both as a citizen and a professional, is a structured framework that involves your local, your municipal ordinances, your county ordinances, and and the state ordinances. In your best case scenarios, those things are harmonized, and the county and the city are talking to each other, but not in every instance. In some spaces, there's a little bit of a dissonance or a tension between the different ordinances. A thing to remember in Texas, and this is a Texas government kind of 101 thing, is that the local governments in Texas are in fact authorized by the state constitution, which means that they are subsidiary to the state in terms of laws and jurisdictions. And so the governor does in fact have the authority to preempt state ordinances so long as the content of that preemption is in fact constitutional. In other words, the governor couldn't say, I'm going to pass an order that cities and counties have to comply with that would violate the civil rights of the people as expressed and enumerated in case law, for instance. But the governor can say, we're going to have this is what the state is going to do, and local ordinances are not allowed to detract from what it is that is precisely what we do. And we fought that on a variety. I say we fought that. We've experienced that, and in some cases fought that on a variety of issues where the preemption of local authority has been a thing long before COVID.
Sure.
But it's sort of special at this point because we are living like we have never lived before under city and county orders and state orders in terms of that are affecting our daily lives in a way that is absolutely new to me. So,
and I think when it comes to specific community college issues to stay up to date, TACC has a good page on that. Some really good resources. There's a link up there to the right of the screen as well that you can look at. I keep looking to my left, but on the screen it's on the right. But you can look over there and see what TAC is following, as well as and also our blog. Just go to our website and click on the blog, and we have information up there.
And that information from TACC, which is a good compilation of what the individual institutions are doing, is two things. One, it's just very good information, and two, it's illustrative of the fact that we are, as a group, as a community college group, we're really doing a pretty good job of communicating with each other and harmonizing our responses. Everyone has sort of preserved their individual choice of action but have chosen to act in a way that is clearly in concert with one another. So there aren't a bunch of really crazy outliers in terms of what the institutional response to this thing, at least from our reading so far. Some of our members may differ, and if so, let us know. But in general, the colleges have followed a fairly cohesive path in how they responded to this thing.
I think it's a good model for how to have that local control with coordination, and I hope we can continue with that. By the way, if you have any questions or that you'd like us to address, just post them in the comments there in the bottom right corner, and we'll be checking those as we go along. Again, I'm looking to the left, the bottom right corner down there, and we'll bring those up as we go along. So let me ask you the question I know you can't answer, but I feel like we need to talk about, which is what the future holds. We know that through the end of the semester, everything will be online. Campuses are closed. We don't.
More revealing my ignorance.
well, that's right, because everybody else knows, and why didn't they? No. How do we talk about the past this semester? No official pronouncement has been made even about the summer. I've heard that UT Austin has said they will not have classes on campus this summer. They haven't announced yet, to the best of my knowledge, about next fall, but it sounds like even that may not be likely. What are you hearing, even if we don't have any official word?
Well, I mean, I guess first I would say we have sort of near term, middle term, and long term, maybe a way to talk about it. The near term, we actually know more than we knew 2 weeks ago. As I said, we know that I'm sure it seemed like a fait accompli to most people in terms of the semester. You would have been crazy to come back, try to come back for 3 days in the middle of May, even if it were in any way remotely possible. But to have that settled at least is the starting point, a starting point. So in the absolute near term, you all know the drill. You're figuring out how to do your work in concert with your institutions. I think another important thing to point out in that near term space is that on April 18th, which was Saturday, I believe, or Friday, I can't remember, Saturday maybe, the Commissioner of Higher Ed, Harrison Keller, published a statement about response to COVID in the context of credit and evaluation. And it was interesting because the statement itself, again, the sort of points in the statement, and you can read that again on that Higher Ed Coordinating Board website. It's there under the date April 18th. That statement essentially said, be flexible and mindful of all of the challenges of this thing for faculty and for students, and the inequities that might be created by trying to move everything online in an unexpected fashion, all these things. But the key part of it, again, was in the preamble to the statement, to the statement of values, which was an assertion that flexibility is important, that we know one size does not fit all, and that we know that the individual institutions are going to be able to respond in a way that is most appropriate. But here are the values that we would like all of the institutions to follow while they're making that individualized response. And that's kind of important. That's an important message, I think, from the executive branch of government and from the Higher Ed Coordinating Board in particular, which is they're open to flexibility. They're open to, they want to walk that narrow path of making sure that we have common values and that we don't create inequities as individual institutions, but they just say it straight out. We understand that one size does not fit all in this situation. And I think that's important for our faculty. I think that's important for our institutions and the management that you all are doing in the institutions, that there is room to maneuver in terms of your particular student populations and what you're seeing in this near-term space, in this space that is not summer school and not next year, but how do you finish out the semester and award credit and transfer credits from one institution to the other and that kind of thing. The message from the state is do your best and do your thing and be as flexible as you can be. In other words, as permissive as you can be in the current circumstances. In the middle term summer, we have been the governor said directly in his press conference on Friday, on the 17th, that there would be guidance issued from the Higher Ed Coordinating Board and that Harrison Keller is working on it. We haven't seen it yet. If I were a betting man, and I've talked to some people about this thing, so it's a little bit of a slanted bet, I guess, inside information bet, but it will not be about opening up the institutions. It will be about how we can do summer online. And you know, again, this shouldn't be news to anybody on this call, because probably everybody on this call is working on this to some degree, or has been told, we don't know what's going to happen, but be prepared to work online. In the further term fall and then into the legislative session, which maybe we'll talk about in a little bit, nobody knows, because we don't know. Those are the giant national COVID questions of, are we going to get a bounce as we start to loosen up and let people do more things? Are we going to get a resurgence of the disease? Are we going to get a vaccine for the disease in a super rush way? Are we going to get a vaccine that doesn't have trials and the vaccine fails? Are we going to find out that it's communicable after you've had it? We just don't. I mean, we're all watching Dr. Fauci on TV try to tell us, gee whiz, there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And so, and because the disease is calling the shots at this point, it is hard for us to know what our framework will be in the context of the disease. So stay flexible, man.
Well, and I know one of the big concerns I keep hearing echoed among our members has to do with enrollments. What will enrollments look like this summer? What will they look like in the fall? And that will be driven partly by the economy and what students can even afford to do in terms of enrolling, and also in terms of whether it's in person or online, because people seem to be less motivated to enroll for the online classes at that kind of scale that we're accustomed to.
Yeah, of course, we've never had a situation where that was the only thing on the menu. So it's hard to know, right? Because we don't know what that looks like. And we also, I mean, frankly, there are some really big economic questions in Texas right now.
Well, that's the part I'd like to get with you about, it having to do with the economy generally, the state budget. We do have a question here. Bill Simsick is asking what information you've heard about community colleges with regard to the stimulus monies being offered by the federal government. I know they were eligible for some of that money. Have you heard anything on that?
Yes. And hey, Bill, how are you doing? It is actually, there are some very definitive answers to that question. There is the CARES Act got passed, this thing that you've heard about on the national news, the $2 trillion coming out of the federal government into the state spaces. It's really weird because you can say, here's $2 trillion, but it's one thing to have it and it's another thing to spend it. It's another thing to understand, where did this $2 trillion come from? I didn't know we had that in the mattress. But the fact is that Congress passed and the president signed this bill. That bill gives $12.5 billion directly to higher education institutions. And there is a definitive list. If you go to, I think we have a link that the AACC did on this that you can look at. That drills all the way down to the institutional level. So you can see how much McLennan College or any college in our state is actually slated to get that money. And it's divided as you might expect, with enrollment being a large part of the way the money is divided. Everything right now coming out in terms of the methodology may look complex, but it's really dealing with gross issues like, just what we can get right now in terms of statistics on these colleges. It's not super finely distributed. It's more or less about size of colleges.
And that AACC's list is constantly being updated. So please check that link. Right. Katie's going to be adding that, I think, to the comments here. So you'll be able to check that and get the current list and keep an eye on it as it changes. Now we have another member who's asking. She's mentioning in Arizona, a colleague has told her that they'll be cutting 40% in state funding for Arizona colleges and universities. This will result in pay cuts and layoffs. Any news about Texas? And that's an important part of what I wanted to visit with you about today as well, because we have the overall economic slump that we're in, which is devastating. And on top of that, we have what would otherwise be the headline for weeks, which is the price of oil dropping and the impact that has, especially on Texas. We've never seen anything like that. And here we have both happening at one time. So talk a little bit about the budget and what the state can do and you think likely might do.
Sure. I mean, we're actually talking, we happen to be meeting with each other today on one of the most gruesomely inauspicious days in the history of the oil economy worldwide, in that, as I'm sure many of you have seen and read, the oil futures contracts for the past period expired today, and that was driving a buying and selling of those future contracts and of the actual commodity price of oil itself. And for the first time in history, oil producers have been paying oil shippers and storers to take product off their hands. The oil price actually went negative because of the costs of storage and the fact that they still had oil coming out of the ground and didn't know what they could do with it. And it is, I mean, if you go and read the literature on it, the people and talk to oil and gas people who really, really, really know this business and have worked in it their whole lives are just sitting in stunned state in their chairs over what is happening with oil. That's important to us for a couple of reasons. One is that our severance tax is important. It's an important part of what we collect in Texas just in general and drop straight into the general fund. Our severance tax is 4.9% of the value of what we're pulling out of the ground, and 4.9% of zero is not very much. And
we have some math faculty with us, so if you know the answer to that.
Yeah, what is 4.9% of zero? And the fact is that the good news is that you can't actually say you're having to sell this, you're having to pay for this oil to get off your land, so pony up anti-tax money or something. I don't know what that would be. But the state's not having to pony up taxes to the producers in the negative space. And the price of oil has rebounded to the sort of heady number of about $9 per barrel. The last time I checked it anyway, which was about 30 minutes ago. But all of that is, we're going to be devastated. And it's expensive in relative terms to produce oil in Texas. The Permian shale production is particularly expensive. You have to be at about $50 a barrel for that to be worth it. For a working ordinary well in Texas, you have to be closer to $30 than $20 a barrel for it to be cost effective for you to pull oil out of the ground. There is no incentive right now for people to be pumping oil and to be working those fields, like nothing. No economic incentive whatsoever. In fact, a tremendous economic disincentive for that. The other thing that the severance tax does that's important is that it is the big charging pump for the rainy day fund. So when you hear about the rainy day fund and the multiples of billions of dollars that are in the rainy day fund, where that comes from is a workaday distribution into that fund from the severance tax. And the oil economy has been so good over the course. I mean, it's had its ups and downs, but in general, it has been so good for the last decade or so that our rainy day fund has been an embarrassment of riches, that we've had so much in it that we have even had mandatory distributions from it because it has reached its cap, which is 10% of the expected state revenue. And so none of that is going to happen. We're really in a perfect storm in a way, because we have the oil thing, which is started out as separate from COVID. It started out as a fight between Russia and Saudi Arabia, and sort of the collapse of the inventory control of oil, and then in that pumping frenzy that Saudi Arabia sort of initiated, we had this sudden incredible downturn in demand that is a function of COVID, and the net result is every dang teapot that you can put oil in the world is getting full really fast. And it's going to take a long time for a demand to come back from that. And so we're looking at a direct revenue reduction in the severance tax into the general fund, and we're looking at probably a minute, if not complete, stagnation of the rainy day fund and the money that's in that.
And people talk about the rainy day fund a lot, and it has been dipped into before, sometimes because the money has to get spent, sometimes because we've needed it, but it's rare that we've done that.
Right.
But it is dwarfed by this these circumstances.
Right.
And so I think we've heard people spend the rainy day fund 7 or 8 times just talking about it. So
that was only the last time we talked, Richard. I think we're up to about 40 times now. But
so what do we look at there? Because I mean, I think the challenge for us next fall, certainly next legislative session,
sure.
we're going to want to make the case to legislators that the way out of this economic slump is community colleges, and there is a powerful case to be made there. What do you see legislators? Are they going to say, "We believe you, but we just don't have the money to give"? It's not a question of how compelling the argument is. Is this benefit in that?
I guess I would start by going back to the 40% question, the Arizona 40%. For good or ill, and maybe for good at this point, our legislature is not in session. Mm-hmm. And we are one of the very few biennial legislatures, state legislatures in the United States. So a lot of legislators it's wild in the rest of the country, because there are legislatures that can't meet. There are legislatures where legislators are getting sick from their preliminary meetings. A friend of mine is a state representative and committee chair in Louisiana, and they've already lost a couple of legislators to the virus, and that's really shaken up the legislature. So they're not meeting and trying to figure out how they will. We don't have the governor can, by executive order, try to get people not to spend money. We've seen this before. We've seen this in some of the letters that have come out of the governor saying, as the executive of the state, I'm asking you to cut your budget by 7.5%, or to freeze travel expenditures, for instance. That's not an issue for us right now, or whatever. But in terms of an actual policy cut to higher education, that's not possible right now, because the legislature is not in session to create that budget. We talked about that $12.5 billion that's going out directly to higher education institutions out of the CARES Act. Texas will also be receiving about $12 billion in this initial tranche. And there is no double dipping. So the legislature can spend that $12 billion on institutions that have already gotten direct money from the feds with no fear of offset. So that $12 billion so far, and we'll probably see more from the feds, is also in play for us. We do have rainy day funds in the rainy day fund. We're not, it has taken modest investment hits because it's invested very conservatively. So there are pools of money from which we can draw to try to make a budget. The problem, of course, is that we're going to be in competition with every need of the state. The good news for us is that we tend to be a basic structural building block to those needs. In other words, when you spend $1 on community colleges, you're not just spending it on community colleges, but you're spending it getting your workforce ready to go, increasing the attractiveness of Texas to industry, keeping people out of jail, all the things.
I've heard people say that this is our seed corn, and
right.
you have to use that to get out of a downward spiral.
That's exactly right. So we're going to have some budget options. And I'll tell you, and this is strictly my opinion, and I'll tell you what I think. In some ways, it's a hopeful message. In some ways, it's not. And that is that I think that we're going to have a challenging session in 2021, no doubt about it, as we try to figure out what to do. But we're going to have this federal help that is going to be coming in. There's a mighty election year this year, and it is informing some of these policy decisions. And there are a lot of people who are anxious to spend a lot of federal money out into the states. We're going to have at least 2 really tough sessions because of this, because we're going to have this session, which will be difficult, but offset somewhat by federal spending. We're going to have the 2023 session where they'll say, okay, now you stand on your own 2 feet, and we will have backfilled a lot of our structural deficiencies with that federal money, and then we'll be trying to figure it out. We had this similar on a much smaller scale, and let me emphasize much smaller scale, in the 2009-2011 sessions when we had the mortgage-backed securities crisis in 2008. We had a bunch of federal money that helped us fill the holes in our budget in 2009. It was a tough year, but we made it. And then in 2011, when that help was withdrawn, it got very tricky.
Yeah.
So,
tough session. Yeah. Well, so I think I'm hearing that a lot of college presidents around the state are very interested in finding ways to keep their workforce employed, that the employees of the college remain as is. And I think they want to do that for a lot of reasons, partly so that they can fulfill the mission of the college. And if people are unemployed, there is a possible scenario where our enrollments could potentially go up as people use that time to gear up for another job. But also there's value in it because whatever community you're in, keeping your workforce employed helps your community. It keeps the employment rate up, and the people who work at community colleges need to stay in their communities, buying groceries, helping sustain that local economy. So even on that very direct equation, keeping community colleges functioning is in the best interest of the local communities and the state as well.
okay.
So we've talked about the rainy day fund. Are there things that you're seeing? I mean, if we can, given all these unknowns, let's say it's January of 2021, the session is just getting started, and Beeman Floyd is looking back at April of 2020 saying, man, I wish we had done X, or wow, I'm glad we did X. What are those things that you would say making the case for community colleges is easier? We can do this more effectively because of what we could do right now.
Well, I mean, I think the main thing is all of us doing our jobs. I mean, the strength of our advocacy effort is always us being able to say, here's what it looks like. As the more you know about community colleges, the more you look at what we're doing, the more you examine the way we responded to this crisis, the more you'll like us. The best thing in the world for somebody who's doing advocacy at the Capitol can do, and I've always been able to I've always had this with community colleges, and it's awesome, is the more you know, the better we do. that there's no shaping of a narrative, there's no spin here. It's just learn. And so to the extent that you all are out there beating your heads against it and being flexible and finishing out this semester and figuring out how to do summer, whatever that looks like in your institutions, that's what's going to inform the debate in the next legislative session. And it's going to be really important. Everybody's going to be looking for working systems and structures. And we are going to be that thing. I think, unless I am completely missing it, one of the things that's going to come out of this in general is a recognition of the fact that we have a healthcare marketplace, but we really haven't had a healthcare system, either in the state or in the country for that matter. And the marketplace is not the best delivery system in a public policy crisis, in a medical crisis that is also a public policy crisis, something so broad-based. So there will likely be demands on us that we haven't, in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. We have had the nursing shortages and allied health shortages over time. I think this is going to be happening on a different scale. And so we're going to be asked to do that, to do direct training of professions that are necessary. We're going to be asked to do job retraining as companies try to figure out what to do. And if we find out if there have actually been structural changes to the economy because of COVID, or if we just start right up again, we're going to be a place for people to go when they don't have anything else to do, but want to be good citizens and use their time wisely. This is, again, something we're familiar with regard to particularly the oil economy in Texas. When our enrollments go up, as if the economy goes down, our enrollments go up. We may see that on a much greater scale.
That actually, I think that also speaks to something I've been hearing. We've been working for some time on increasing stacked credentials, so that you're getting your earning certificates as you work through, for instance, an associate's degree program. Right. And we'll probably see more of that, because people will very quickly get these high value credentials as they go along. And that may increase and shorten the time horizon that a student has to think in terms of to get what they need to get a job. And that makes our programs look really valuable across the state.
Right. I mean, I think what everybody's going to be looking for coming out of this thing is value and bargains. We are historically both of those things. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying, therefore, this is great. Look, it says it's a great environment. Not far from it. This gives us a better platform from which to argue for extremely scarce resources.
And it's something. It does seem like we're as the job gets harder, the imperative that we do it also goes up. That our faculty and our administrators as well are working very hard right now, and this is a very challenging time. But the urgency of what we're doing has never been greater. Certainly not in our lifetimes.
And maybe that's the best way to put it, Richard. I mean, I think that's if there's a message to the people on this webinar, it is that be advised that your work is not in vain. That it's whatever you're doing to keep your individual classroom or your individual student afloat, or your department afloat, or your institution afloat. All of that is meaningful in the context of our need for resources as I said, really in the coming 4-year cycle of funding for community colleges.
Now we have a question here that it was not something, it's something I've thought about, but I think it does relate to community colleges, having to do with discussion on mailing ballots for elections. Our community colleges have elections for their boards, and they participate in that directly, and they need to be able to elect boards on a regular basis. Have you heard any talk in Texas about the status of mail-in ballots?
Yeah, I mean, what I haven't heard is any definitive decisions that have been made, but there's already pretty strong positioning in the political fight over it. As we know, and this is something that, again, I say editorially, and I say it with some angst as a Texas citizen and American citizen. Um, uh, with regard to redistricting and with regard to certain laws related to voting, those things get highly politicized sometimes, and sometimes people try to find advantage in those spaces. Again, the interesting thing about this particular crisis is that it's so unprecedented that nobody has quite figured out yet where the advantage lies. Because really the question is, how do you get your guys to the ballot box? And traditionally, the idea has been that Republicans will find their way to the ballot box, rain or shine, and wherever it is and whatever. So the easier you make it to vote, the better it is for Democrat interests, and the less good it is for Republican interests. But if you look at age and risk factors and all kinds of things in the specific paradigm of this pandemic, who knows? I mean, it's very confused. There are concerns, mostly specious, as far as we can tell so far, about voter fraud that have been brought up on mail-in ballots. There are certainly ways that you can secure that. So the answer to that question is yes, there has been discussion, and there is ongoing discussion between the Secretary of State, the executive branch of government, and the counties who are charged in that basic sense with tallying up votes in Texas. But there has not been a definitive solution yet about how we're going to run the next elections. And remember that we have an upcoming runoff election that is kind of a big deal. And there has been fundraising and low-key campaigning that has gone on throughout this crisis. It's almost been entirely stamped out by the news of the crisis itself. But we've got a big Senate race for that Democrat for who's going to run in the U.S. Senate seat, and it's kind of a, without naming candidates' names, because we are nonpartisan. This is a nonpartisan call. But this is a big deal, and that question of mail-in ballots is a big deal, and the question of whether or not the election is going to get pushed or not is a big deal. All those things are under discussion, but none of the hash has been settled.
Okay. It's interesting too, because in my lifetime, it seems like it's always been that you don't want to make those decisions based on partisan calculations, or you don't want to be seen as doing that. And now it seems like increasingly everybody's getting out there and just saying, yeah, that's how we're making this decision, is on just kind of raw political advantage. Now we have another question here from Susie Honeywell, and her question has to do with the role of prisons in all of this. And that is, I think, an important discussion. It's one you and I have talked about. It is a part of the mission of community colleges, reaching out to prison populations, getting them educated, getting them credentialed, so that they can, as they emerge back in society, that they're prepared to get a job. Those are wildly successful programs where they're done, especially at a large scale. What are you seeing on that? Are there opportunities here, especially with COVID-19 happening, that it's hard to get faculty into a prison to teach a class?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that COVID is revealing in a very direct way, it's not an ancillary thing at all, but there has been a sort of pace to the evolution technologically, and I think there's a broader question that we have about technology and how it works in schools, and how it can advance aims like the 60 by 30. And then there's this very specific question related to when a place that was already problematic and we had conventional solutions to those problems suddenly becomes much more problematic because of what's happening with the COVID-19 situation. I would say that it most definitely is spurring. You can't necessarily say that it's spurring innovation, but it's certainly spurring the hunt for innovation that exists. In other words, we tend to say, well, we'll sort of implement this thing nice and slow, and then something like this happens, and you say, wow, you asked the question earlier, would it have been good if we had this? Mm-hmm. And I think that there is an enormous amount of, I'm sort of calling it the after action report on this thing, where you say, where were we really unprepared? Where could we have been prepared? It was sitting right there and we just didn't have it actually snapped in to place to be able to use. And I think that all of those questions are going to be in play once we get over the preliminary, very human, cannot turn away from it tragedy of COVID and what it's doing to people's health and what it's doing to people's families and what it's doing to people's freedoms and general sense of well-being. If we get past that thing, which I think we will, then there's going to be this enormous after action report of how could we have been better prepared? Where could we have been better? Where could we have done, where could we have actually had existing technologies in place that would be helpful every day? So but that would have been specifically helpful in this situation.
Yeah, and I'm seeing it a lot in conversations I'm having with people around the state, is that there are things that we are doing now that they're looking at and saying, we should have been doing this all along. This crisis is just forcing us to do things that we just didn't get around to before, maybe felt like we didn't need to, and things are happening more quickly. I'm going to be interested to see when this is all over, what's different and better, even that we found a better way to do it because we had to. It seems like people are kind of on two tracks. One is let's just do what we need to do to get through the day, the week, the month, and that is important work. But then beyond that, what are some things that we could do that are going to be actual advances as a result of it?
Yeah,
and I think an example is a good one because the need is so pressing and the constraints are so great.
Yeah, and I think that the prison system and education in the prison system is really an interesting laboratory for that, because you've got the potential for online services, but the need for those services to be so carefully maintained, and an enormous tension in that space between the chance for people to really do something that is helpful to them personally, is helpful to the state in terms of recidivism and to humanity, in terms of getting folks an education in a way that they may not have ever had access before. But you have to be able to do it in a way that is socially responsible and maintainable in the context of the corrections system. And so, I mean, this sounds terrible. I don't mean this to sound pejorative when I say it, but in some sense, it's such a unique environment and a difficult environment that if you can do it there, you can do it anywhere. So to the extent that we can learn lessons about what is possible to do in the corrections system there, that has obvious direct value in the correction system and might have a broader value in the rest of our structures. I will tell you this though, and I think that this is an important thing to say. One of the things that will come out of this situation is there will be lots of people with really good ideas that are very, very specific to the COVID-19 experience, but actually are not applicable to the rest of to the ongoing world, right? If you study World War I, it's replete with examples of people who had very small successes on the battlefield who then tried to scale those things and got a lot of guys killed. And so we need to, on the one hand, we need to learn everything we can from this experience, but on the other hand, we need to be somewhat careful about what we do and how we do it. And I'll give you a great example of this. I've talked with a lot of professional people in the past 4 to 6 weeks. And they've said, we've learned what we can do remotely. Like, we're running businesses remotely, we can do it. We've also learned how much value there was in something that was almost invisible to us, which was being able to walk down the hall and stick our heads in the office and solve problems all the time, real time, without having to make an appointment to solve tiny problems, right? And so there are a set of trades in there that are just like really important. And I think that this applies to, I think our population has been understanding this for a long time in online education, that there are things that you can really do online that you couldn't do, and you can be really efficient. You can reach a lot of students, and you can and create a lot of opportunity out in the world. And at the same time, there are just things that are just so much harder in that space that you don't that you don't know until you don't have it, you know. And so I think there's going to be a giant raft of data coming at us from all sectors of our economy and educational spaces about what this has done and what we can extract from it, but also some caution about going too far.
Linda Compte is our president this year, and her focus, the thing that she said she really wants us to focus on this year, and she thought of this idea long before any of this started, with the value of face-to-face communication, and that there are things you just can't replace. You need face-to-face communication, and I think we need to make the most of the tools we have, and if we can't meet face-to-face, let's do everything we can short of that while we have to. But you're right, we need to acknowledge that there is something that is just lost, and as soon as we get the chance, we need to get together. And I think there is sort of a felt need for it that we're having now, because it's not the same.
Well, and there's a middle path, right? Which is enhanced technology. We're on it right now, right? You and I have had lots of calls and have never had a Zoom interaction until the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting here saying whatever I'm saying, and I can see when you say, "Is that guy crazy? I can't believe he's saying that." And it's helpful.
Got to watch my facial reactions. I usually don't with you. I just.
That's right. But I mean, so it's a rich environment for thinking about change and changes and what works and what doesn't work, and chaos always. I mean, what's the famous quote? That Switzerland had 800 years of stable democracy, and what did they give us? The cuckoo clock. The Italian states are just a constant state of chaos. What do they give us? The Renaissance. So it's there is a certain amount of value in chaos so long as it's not persistent and doesn't actually destroy your civilization.
Yeah, learn the right lessons from it. Now, we did have a question a few minutes ago about any predictions about what happens if there's a COVID-19 resurgence at the time higher education attempts to reopen in the fall. And again, I think Yogi Berra said that he was terrible about making predictions, especially about the future. Right. And that's definitely true with me. So I wouldn't want to make predictions about it, but there are probably ways to think about it that can help us prepare for whatever happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best news related to that question is that that's a question that is being asked in a variety of ways and spaces. At the governor's press conference on Friday, a reporter raised her hand and said, have you considered what will happen if we have a resurgence and we have to go back to quarantine, and what that does to this concept of opening the economy? In other words, are you taking a risk with this? And the governor's answer was that answer of careful incrementalism. That's why we're trying to be carefully incremental. That's why we're going to have testing, again, unspecified how we're going to actually be able to do it broadly. But I think that reporter was doing a service to the world, and our questioner here is doing a service to us to ask that question. It's very difficult to have a clear response to it because the conditions are so changeable. The fall semester is what, 3 times further away from us now than the commencement of this crisis. Mm-hmm. And so it's and things during this crisis have changed day to day. And so it's hard to know what we're going to be dealing with in, first week of August of this year, but it's super important to ask that question because you have to, one, have contingency plans, and two, where you can't really guess all the contingencies, just have a basic flexibility pattern where you can pull the lever and make the right move.
Yeah, because a lack of planning puts us in a really weak position. If we say, well, we don't know what's going to happen, so we'll just sit and wait. We need to be planning, but we need to hold those plans loosely and be flexible. And so investing a lot of time in preparing for face-to-face classes in the fall may not be very prudent right now, but being ready to, or knowing that might be a possibility would be good to have in mind. We may find that the semester kicks off face-to-face in the fall. We have a resurgence, and the same thing as this semester in end of September, we have to pull back, and that may be a possibility as well. And I think those you were saying earlier that the state really is looking for those strong, resilient systems because those are the ones that are going to see us through.
Right.
And I think community colleges need to be those systems, and historically have been just remarkably responsive to conditions and to their communities.
Yeah, and I apologize for the military metaphor, a bad habit of mine, but there's a big difference between a rout and falling back to a prepared position. And if we wind up having to fall back from a full opening of the economy in general, our institutions in particular, we're well served by falling back into a prepared position, and that's part of our work, I think.
We just to make sure we're careful with our time, there's probably two more points I'd like to get to. If we could spend maybe 30 seconds on this one question of Senate Bill 944, passed last legislative session, had nothing to do with COVID-19, but it is something that probably hits us especially hard right now. Can you give us the quick rundown on it? And Katie will put the link to that bill language in the comments. Yeah,
that'd be great. Senate Bill 944 is about open meetings, open records, and it's specifically about when anyone who is subject to open meetings or open records, and that includes our faculty and staff in the performance of their duties at public institutions, when those people are using personal electronic devices, like your personal cell phone, your personal computer. The 944 was not a big change. Really wasn't a change to the actual content and spirit of the law at all. If you're doing something that is part of your official capacity as a teacher, that has to do with students, it has to do with programs that you're implementing, that is potentially subject to open meetings and open records. There are exceptions all over the place for things like FERPA and and there are other exceptions, but in general, if somebody comes to your institution and says, I want the records on how this course was developed, then your public information officer has 10 days to comply with that request and ask you for your emails and that kind of thing, or just gets them off the server. Well, there were issues related to people in the world, not us. It was more about things like county planning and zoning and things like that.
Right.
People having offline private communications about things that should have been publicly discoverable. And the ACLU and the Texas Association of Broadcasters and the Texas media people were very upset that they felt like they were being gamed by certain people in certain jurisdictions and this was a big news story in San Antonio. It had to do with county commissioner and some county planning. And so this last session, there was a bipartisan bill that basically defined this use of private technology and created something called the temporary custodian of a record.
We need to move on, but that bill language is available in the here, and you can download that language, have a look at it because it does apply to you.
Yeah, the punchline of this, Richard, is very straightforward, which is if it's something that you're doing for work, don't delete it.
Good.
And then go to the bill and learn about ways that you can move it off of your personal computer or personal phone into the institutional server, and then you don't have to worry about it.
And now that we're doing more and more online, that it's more urgent or more in our places.
This bill is getting an unimaginable beta test right now in the world. All right.
So last question, and I know we've gone over just a little bit, but this is maybe the most important question. Communicating with legislators between now and next session and during next session. But how and what's the message? What would you advise our members do now in their relationships with legislators?
I would say two things to them. One is the legislators are all in their community. They're not here. The Capitol's locked up tight. Mm-hmm. So any citizen of Texas can probably get to their legislator easier than I can get to them because they're not here and their staffs are not here. I think the two most important things to say to legislators are we're working our butts off and we are concerned about what's going to happen to us in the spring and want to work with you about that. We're not dummies. We know that it's going to be a tough session, but we think we're doing good work here. So one, we're doing the work now and we're as in as good a humor and as well as we can do it. And two is we will be seeking to work with you in the fall to make sure that we don't damage our institutions in the coming difficult session.
That's fantastic. And I think we have a lot of success stories we can be pointing to say the difference we're making at this moment in time. 85% of the nurses in Texas come out of community colleges. If there were ever a need for healthcare workers, it is right now, and we are where they come from. So I think they need to be told that. So when you get the chance, be sure and do that. One other thing I'd mention is that these small group meetups that I mentioned at the beginning, the TCCTA meetups, I hope you'll sign up for those. You can send an email to Katie Agnew, express your interest, go to the website, you can find out more about it. We do have special meetups that have been created just out of popular demand for healthcare workers and nursing faculty and administrators. So if you are among those members of the community college, you can sign up to be in direct communication with your colleagues around the state on what you're doing right now on your campuses to respond to this crisis. Those are things we really want to capture what's coming out of those conversations, because it's going to help us message to the college, to legislators, what our colleges are doing, the way they've stepped up, providing PPEs for healthcare workers and all kinds of other things that colleges are really just absolutely necessary in this moment. So please join that conversation. It will be of benefit to you personally in your work, but it's also, you'll be contributing to an important conversation that we need to be having statewide. If in whatever discipline you are in, whatever role you're in at the college, there are communities that are gearing up right now to talk about the things that are right at the center of your attention. So please be a part of that. I also want to end just by thanking you for all that you do. When you look at what we are dealing with right now, the answer to so many of the challenges that we're facing when it comes to healthcare issues and economic issues find their solutions at community colleges. What you do is so important. And so your decision, when you decided to become an educator, I want to affirm that decision and thank you for it. You're making a difference for the state of Texas, the communities that you live in, and I'm so proud to be a part of the work that you're doing. Let's keep in touch throughout all of this. Let's stay in touch. Please post any comments you have on in the comments in the chat section of this discussion. Join the small groups that are forming around the state, and check our blog. We'll be putting information out, and we'll be seeking as much feedback as we can get. This needs to be a conversation. We sure are glad that you're a part of it, and we appreciate being a part of the work that you do. Beeman, thanks for your time, and we'll talk again soon.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.